this. Well, it seems like there's a fight now between the ACCC and Google. The ACCC said Google put out misinformation when it put out this campaign on its website last week. It was claiming that this forced negotiation between Google and news companies, and Facebook, I should say, so that Google would pay more for news, to use news, could mean that Google's no longer free, maybe YouTube as well. What have you made of this stoush?
I think a number of things. Firstly, I start from the point that any organisation that benefits from a concentrated level of market power, that has to be dealt with. So in Google's case, in Facebook's case, it's clear that something has to happen. But I'm also conscious that the beneficiaries of this process, particularly News Corp, have benefited from some of the most concentrated media markets on the planet. So I think we need to walk into this eyes wide open. And I certainly was surprised at the level of reaction that people had to Google putting its side of the story forward. I mean, Google has been kicked well and truly through News Corp papers for the last 2 years or so on these issues. And mind you, News Corp, that has no problem thugging anyone else that it believes is standing in the way of its interests and has done so in times past, thinks that anyone else who stands up for themselves is doing the wrong thing. It's bear-hugged. The anti-regulation News Corp that has bear-hugged now the ACCC and got the ACCC to come out and express its views in the way it has in the last week. I think the ACCC has to be very careful about the way it intervenes in these discussions. It has to be very careful indeed, because I think that, I instantly got suspicious about the way this was all travelling back in April when the government closed prematurely the way in which these negotiations were being handled. And I'd be very interested to see whether or not the ACCC had expressed to all the parties involved in the negotiations whether or not they were actually dissatisfied with the rate at which Google and others were responding to the ACCC leading into the actual negotiations.
And I'll just say, for transparency's sake, of course, News Corp, owner of Sky News, but what are you saying the ACCC didn't do here? I mean, when we look at Google's response around the world, including in Spain, they've essentially walked away previously because they don't like being made to pay for news and the way they monetise it. So isn't that the likelihood of what's happened here again? And by this threat from Google and what they're putting out there right now, they're just playing the same game, aren't they?
I am very concerned at this point in time, from what I'm seeing, the premature end of these negotiations back in April, some of the elements of this in terms of the non-discriminatory components of the framework that are being discussed. I'm very concerned that this is shaping up to be a News Corp bailout rather than a genuine attempt to level the playing field. Again, News Corp has railed against anti-regulation or railed against regulation in times past and is now shaping up the negotiating table in its favour through these negotiations. News Corp has made a series of business decisions over the years that have turned out bad, and now they're trying, in effect, to get the ACCC and the government, the federal government, a compliant coalition, to act on their behalf.
This is not just News Corp. I'll say one thing first of all as well on when you're talking about concentration. Google, in terms of search concentration on mobile phones in Australia, where more and more of this is going, 98%. You're saying that you're worried about News Corp's market concentration. If you look at the top 10 websites, look, I said ABC in there, Daily Mail, 9.com.au, 7 News, The Guardian, news.com.au, which is News Corp, SMH, The Age, and Yahoo. I mean, that's a lot more diversity than we're talking about what Google has.
I said at the outset, didn't I? But I said at the outset, didn't I, of our discussions, that any organisation that has concentrated power in a market, that is it's not tenable. And I've said this directly to Google as well, mind you, both to their local and US execs. But at the same time too, News Corp has benefited from a very concentrated media market. Let's be clear about that too. And News Corp, as I said, made a number of decisions over the years to chase a particular market, the way that it's managed its advertising, the circulations that are falling, and those decisions that have been made,
this has been the changing media face across. Media's shifted to online. It's not just News Corp. All media companies have suffered in this same way.
Well, there have been some, I've got to say...
So the point about Google's...
I'm not saying this purely to wave the flag for Google.
Yeah, but Rod Sims has looked into this in a lot of depth. I mean, don't you think he has credibility? The research he's done and how much power Google has, how much money Google has made out of news compared to news companies. You know, someone clicks on an article and most of the money goes to Google, not the company that makes
I'm sorry, I have a different...
the news.
Well, I'd like to put a contrary point of view in the public space here. And I have previously said that the ACCC's work has been really solid. And I've praised, again to his face, Rod Sims for the work that the ACCC has done. But it's one thing to do the report, it's another thing to execute it. And like I said, when these negotiations were prematurely ended by the government in April, I started to get very suspicious about this. And the other thing is too, you know, a lot of these media outlets have benefited for years. They've been able to call the shots on the advertising revenue that they've gained for years. Not many small businesses got much of a shot on either free-to-air commercial networks or in newspapers because they were priced out. No one ever complained about that. Certainly news never did in times past.
Well, small businesses through all those years have been in smaller newspapers and radio spots. It's, if you're talking about a big and, you know, sometimes national or right across the city newspaper or television, that's where bigger companies go. Smaller companies went to smaller papers and so on that have now basically struggled to survive, a lot of them folding because of, again, the changing nature of news. Isn't that what's happened with...
No, I think there have been business decisions that have been made, particularly by news, in shoving everything behind a paywall. And I complain, and just to let you know, I complained to local editors about this years ago, and I am more than happy for them to verify the fact that I've raised this before. You're not going to get people subscribing to local newspapers, and at the same time, when you don't deliver those newspapers, you're not going to get many eyes in them. The difference, I absolutely agree that Google has a degree of market share that has to be dealt with. But at the same time too, the big revolution in advertising came when Google said, you'll pay a lot less to be able to advertise on our platform compared to others. Now, I've also said to Google that the combination of search and advertising on the one platform gives them a level of market strength combined with the data that they generate through that, that again, regulators are right to tackle absolutely. But what I want to inject into this is to ensure that, as I said, like when you have the way that the negotiations have been going, I am genuinely concerned that this is a bailout for news and not a genuine
I want to get to that point in a moment.
Level the playing field.
When you said a mistake putting things behind a paywall, well, it used to be called buying a newspaper. It cost money. News companies right around the world have been struggling with this, how to monetise the news because... And now we've got companies such as Google, which take most of the money if you do it online, particularly if it's only free. So, of course, they'd respond with a paywall. I mean, a paywall is just paying for a service, isn't it?
Sure. And if people, and this is the other thing too, I mean, in a lot of the cases in terms of News Corp, it's pursued a particular demographic. It's decided to chase a particular, through its news, when you look at the shape of its news and the way it presents, it's decided to chase it. I have to say Fairfax is the same too. I mean, Fairfax goes for the well-heeled subscriber and its news, in many instances, reflects that decision to chase particular advertisers and ensure that advertisers stay with them. And I just think we've got to call some of this stuff out. And the circulations wouldn't be going downwards if you're basically providing a quality content across the board that appeals to a lot of people.
Circulations have gone around right around the world with no matter what approach media companies have taken because of what's happened online. This hasn't been... You're just saying it's Australian companies that have made unique errors around audiences they're targeting?
Well, you're asking me as an Australian politician to reflect on moves by an Australian government to shape regulation in the Australian market. So that's what I'm responding to here, Tom. And I just...
But you're talking about the errors made, just saying that the issue is with media companies and strategies they've taken, whereas no matter what strategy's been taken around the world in recent years, it's been impossible. You're trying to catch a falling knife with the advent of what's happened online and the way the money, there has been money transferred from, traditional ways you make money through newspapers to online. It just hasn't gone to media companies, much of it. It's going more to companies such as Google and Facebook. That's the basic premise here that Rod Sims found.
Well, News and Fairfax decided to make a decision about the way that particularly classified advertising worked, and they de-merged those, and they made that decision and now you've got realestate.com.au and Domain doing quite well, but the decision was to not have any evidence of cross-subsidising the platform. They've made those decisions in that way. The argument's often made that the advertising's dropped, and as I said, News has made decisions to chase particular markets and they've or particular audiences, and if I and I'm saying this absolutely as a Labor politician, a lot of us on the Labor side watch the way that News makes its decisions about how it covers news itself, and we don't necessarily see that it's a level playing field in terms of the way that reporting is done.
But you're saying the News Corp coverage itself.
I'm just the bloke who actually says it up front on air.
Well, you're saying the angle of the stories then that News Corp does, that their political coverage, for example, makes you less likely to do something that would help them out financially?
No, I'm saying that they've made calls in chasing business in the way that they have, and you've seen circulation decline.
But it's not just chasing business, you're talking about the type of coverage just then.
Well, OK, I'm trying to actually respond. I think I'm being quite upfront and direct here, Tom, but just let me finish the point. They've made business decisions to chase particular audiences. They've made decisions about how they'll run their business, and those decisions haven't necessarily paid off and circulation's declining. And so my argument is,
there a media company, a traditional media company, we're nearly out of time, let me ask this, there's a traditional media company over the last 10 or 20 years that's managed to make all these brilliant decisions and not be majorly impacted by what's happening with Google and Facebook?
I actually think the emerging players that you've seen either with The Guardian, or you've seen Schwartz, or you've seen New Daily, or you've seen others come out and emerge and start to build a model that will be sustainable over the longer term. And even they will say that they have had to broaden out or change the way that they operate on the basis of attracting a wider audience. So, from my point of view, I am basically questioning whether, given where the reforms have gone, whether or not they are just being shaped up to help in the negotiation, one big American firm in News Corp versus another big American firm in Google.
We're out of time. Ed Husick, talk soon. Thank you.
Good on you.